to say today that I did write it down, and my husband knows I never write a speech, I just talk off the cuff. But before I get started, I do want to thank my husband, Paul K. Johnson, who just got elected councilman for our town. And he's the first African American to be elected in our town. And he can tell you lots of stories about that journey and all the things that he went through. But he's a trailblazer, so I'm just thankful to be your wifey.
What time?
PBHA, when we were talking earlier about the word that we would choose, I chose two. And one was village and the other was family. And I couldn't decide between the two, but they both are the same to me. And I'm gonna start back to Ruby Bridges last night, who was amazing. You guys, I mean, it's phenomenal. So I decided to talk about me as a 6-year-old. I love to tell stories. My grandmother loved to tell stories, so I'm gonna tell you all the story of how I got to PBH. And I always say PBH, in my era it was PBH. So I'm gonna try to remember to say PBHA, but it's probably not gonna happen. But as a 6-year-old, I lived in a small Midwestern town called Marion, Ohio. And I lived in that house with 10 other people under one roof. So that was me, my mother, my 2 sisters, my brother, my aunt and her child, my uncle, and my grandparents, all in one house. Next door lived my aunt and her 3 kids. And you couldn't have told me anything. I didn't know we were poor. I loved my childhood. And that was because of my family, my grandparents. They didn't play, and they had high expectations for what they expected of me and all of us. I remember telling my mom, and this is, as I'm 6, my mom used to tell us stories all the time, and she was telling me the story about how she didn't get to finish college because she was 19, went to college, met my dad, got pregnant with me, and that was the end. So she ended back up in Ohio. She didn't even finish her first semester. So she's like, it didn't work out for me. I'm trying to raise y'all kids. I'm here trying to do what I need to do. And so I said, you know what? I'm gonna go to college. I'm gonna be a teacher. I'm gonna be an architect. I'm gonna be an engineer. And I'm gonna be the first Miss Black America. That's what I told my mom. So my grandfather liked watching it, but there was, at that time, no Black Miss America. And my mother said, you can't do all of that. You have to pick one thing. And then my grandmother right immediately said, do not tell her what she cannot do. Right. She can do whatever she wants to do. And that moment on, I knew that I was gonna break every stereotype. Anytime somebody told me I couldn't do something, I was like, oh, you got the right one. Because I'm gonna do it, just because you said I can. So, as a 6-year-old in that house, it was still the time, and Ruby said this last night, where children are seen but not heard. That was the thing. We could not comment on anything, but they allowed me to be in all the conversations. Like, I was always around because I was very nosy, and I was always listening to everything. So I heard stories from my grandparents about how they migrated from Georgia to Ohio. My grandfather talked about how his brother was lynched. They were sharecroppers in Georgia, and they came to Ohio to escape. And when they wanted to buy the house that they wanted to buy, they weren't allowed to. So they ended up buying because, redlining, not allowed in that area. So they did end up buying a house, but that was the house where Black people were allowed to live. So on that street, a lot of my family lived on that street. my grandfather would, like I was sitting in there one day and they're saying the KKK is getting ready to march down the street. They're doing a parade. And so I hear my grandfather talking about, well, I'm just gonna sit on a porch with my rifle. And I'm like, oh God, we're all about to die. I'm like, what's about to happen because we'll use it. But he was a strong, tall man and he never raised his voice, but he said what he meant and he meant what he said. And he sat on that porch and they did not come down our street. They politely turned and went to Lincoln Park, which was behind them, and had their little rally. He also didn't play with my education. So I was in 2nd grade, and I remember this to this day. I still remember the teacher, his name was Mr. Thompson. I was getting B's in math and on my report card constantly. And my grandfather couldn't understand why, because I kind of told on myself I was doing my cousin next door's homework as a 7-year-old, and she was in middle school. So finally I had gotten to some math that I couldn't understand. I was like, what are these letters? I don't know how to do this. So I went to my mom, like, I don't understand this. And she was like, whose work is this? And I'm like, it's Roberta's. And she was like, this is algebra. You can't, what are you doing? And so I was doing all this work. Now, the teacher kept giving me B's. And so my grandfather calls him and says, I don't understand how Ayanna is getting B's in class when she can do middle school math. I need you to show me what she's missing. And he couldn't. And so then they got me tested and found that I had this like really high IQ. But that teacher never changed my refuse the entire time I was there. And he was a white man. The teacher across the hall was not my main teacher, was an old black woman, and her name was Miss Scott. And we all thought she was me. She had eyes behind her head, that's what we said, like she could see everything. But she pulled me in the hallway after that whole thing, and she said, you don't need to worry about what that grade says, because you know how to do this, man. And you're gonna come across this all the time. Keep doing what you're doing, and don't let people take you out of your character. I still remember that to this day. I'm in the hallway crying, and my grandfather thanked her for watching out for me in school. So my education experience was not nearly what Ruby Bridges went through, but my family moved a lot because after my parents got back together, my parents were separated for, can you go back? I'm gonna show you. So I like stories, but I also like pictures. So I'm gonna explain these pictures to you. You can go all the way back. Sorry. Is that the first? So you could go to this. So this is my grandmother, Georgia May. And this is me and her, and she lived to be 100 years old. And my husband will tell you, this was the most, I didn't know what I was going to do when she passed. Like, I literally lost my mind. I'm still not over it. This woman is the one that always believed in me, no matter what. When I got into Harvard, she called me and said, what are the colors for Harvard? And I was like, crimson. So she quilted me a quilt with crimson and white and a big H in the middle. And she did it by hand. And she gave that to me. And she was just so proud, like, that I was able to go to college. Because if you go to the next one, she never got a chance to finish middle school. And this is when I was getting married, and she was giving me something old, and it's a handkerchief that a teacher gave to her. And she said, I'm giving this to you because of everything that you do with kids. And I want you to know that there's always somebody that's gonna believe in you. And this was a teacher that she said believed in her. And she said, I always felt like I let that teacher down because I couldn't finish school. But so I'm passing this on to you because I feel like you're going to live out what I couldn't finish. And I like totally fell apart. Like, I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting ready to get married. Why are you telling me this? But the village is very important. Your family is very important. These two lovely people, these are my parents. And this is my mom, this is my dad, and she's actually pregnant with my sister at the time. Now my mom is quiet, but she is the strongest woman that I have ever met. She literally has gone through and is still going through so much. She wasn't a single parent, she was literally married, but she actually was. My dad was not around. My dad was in and out of jail my entire life. He literally, the time that I was at Harvard, he was in prison the entire time. He had went to prison twice. But my mom worked and walked to work to make sure we had what we had. At one point, she only had made $200, and she was still trying to figure out how to raise these 5 kids that she ended up having with him. So my mom couldn't be here today. My dad right now they're still married. That's it's a whole nother story. We're not gonna go there. We're not gonna get into that. But my dad has Alzheimer's and dementia now. He's 82, my mom is 72. And she is taking care of my father. So we were thinking about if they could come, but I was like, this is too much for him. All these people, that would not have been a good thing. But even though like my life with my dad was like trying, the one thing he did was he didn't play with education, and he didn't play with my education. So he would go into a school and go off if you did something to me. He made me do reports on things that were way beyond what I should be doing. When I got interested in the Holocaust, I was like, I had read Anne Frank, and I was like, I was having nightmares. I was like, she could have been saved, I want to save her. And he went and bought me like books like this thick on it, and was like, I want you to read this and do a report. I was like, what in the world? So he would do stuff like that. He named us all African names because he wanted us to know our culture and who we were. So Ayanna is actually an Igbo name. It means beautiful flower. And so what he did was instill in us that education was important, and he would fight for me for things that no one else was allowed to do. So for instance, I was in a school district that did not allow me was trying to keep me out of school or wouldn't put me in the grade that I was supposed to be in. So of no fault of my own, I was in another school, and I was supposed to be in 8th grade, but they gave me 9th grade classes by accident. So I'm taking those 9th grade classes anyway, then they figure out they messed up, and now they're trying to fix it, and my dad's like, oh no, that's against the law. Once she has started doing something, you can't stop her from doing that. And so they literally had to keep me in those classes. They bused me to different schools. My dad did all of that. So even though he caused a lot of other trauma, what he did instill in me is my education. You can go one more. And then I always say that I always had allies that were helping me. This young woman right here, her name is Amy Knapp. She was my best friend in 6th grade in New Jersey. So before I came to Jersey, I had lived in South Carolina, and I literally went into a school that I was the only Black person in that school. And the entire time I was there, not one student talked to me, and the teachers wouldn't even talk to me. I literally raised my hand to ask a question in class, and she refused to answer me, the science teacher. So, and because I was the oldest, my siblings were in a different school, so at least they had each other, but I was by myself. So when we moved back to New Jersey, and I ended up in another school similar to that, and that was all because, again, I really wasn't supposed to be going to that school, but it had the best education, so my dad was like, you're gonna go to school. Her family let me use their address. Okay, y'all, this is illegal, but I used their address, and I would go to her house every day, and we went to school together. And we were completely opposite. She was into Ozzy Osbourne. I was like, who, what? And she wore these black concert shirts, and I was in love with Michael Jackson. And we were like ebony and ivory, that's what they called us. But we were like this, and I had never had a friend that was a different race than me before her. And now she's a lawyer, and to this day she's like, oh my God, remember when we used to? And I'm like, yeah, we were a little bit crazy. And then this teacher, was Miss Gillespie, and she was my gifted and talented teacher. And I was the only Black student in the gifted and talented program. And I went through a lot of drama because of that. And one day she pulled me to the side because the students were doing all this stuff and I was getting upset. And again, the same type of encouragement that Miss Scott gave me, she did the same thing. And at that point I was in the 9th grade. And she was like, you can't let them get to you. You can't let them get to you. You gotta keep doing what you're doing. They're trying to knock you off and you gotta keep going. Because I was at the top of my class and that was a whole controversy at this school. So all that to say is no matter what difficulties and things that I went through as a student, we had no money, we never had a phone, we moved every 6 months because that's pretty much how long it takes to get evicted when you don't pay your rent. And we were constantly going to different schools, but there was always somebody trying to make sure my education was right. So if it was my dad, if it was my grandparents, or if it was people like this that were trying to make sure that I was able to accomplish the goal, because I still was committed to getting my education. Thank you so much for assisting. So all of that to say, I eventually get into Harvard University. I didn't want to go to Harvard, I'm gonna tell y'all the truth. I did not. Had no plans. My goal was to go to Howard University. That was my dream school. And my father did not do, Harvard recruited me. I had won a Goldman Sachs competition, stock tournament. And so I got a application in the mail for Harvard. And I didn't fill it out. It was still waiting. And my dad saw it and he was like, why didn't you fill out that application? I was like, I'm not going there, I'm going to Howard. He's like, no, fill it out. So he made me fill it out, made me go on the interview, but never did my financial aid form. So Monique's going to know about this. Never did it. So I got into all the schools that I applied to and got no financial aid. Now, mind you, my mom literally is taking care of 5 kids. My dad is always running the streets, doing whatever he's doing. So when that bill came for 33, whatever it was, during that time, I was like, I'm not gonna be able to go. So I declined all my schools and I said, I'm gonna have to try to figure this out. Harvard University hunted me down. We didn't have a phone. So first they called my grandmother. I don't know how they got her number. My grandmother comes over and she's like, Harvard's trying to call you. And I'm like, I can't go, whatever. Then I get a call to my high school, and I go down, and Harvard says, well, why did you decline? And I said, because I didn't get financial aid, I can't afford this. And they were like, oh, you don't have to worry about that, come on. So they paid my first year and all of that to come to Harvard. Now, when I got to Harvard, it was like Twilight Zone. I was like so out of place. Everybody was talking about their perfect SAT scores, talking about all the prep schools that they went to and all this stuff, and I'm sitting there like, oh my God, like this is a lot. And I did not have a family base at the time. Like I literally got dropped off at Harvard and that was it. I had no money. People were getting care packages and calling their families. Never did I get a care package. None of that was happening. And I felt so isolated and alone. So I started hanging out with some other students like me. And we were playing spades and one of the guys says, there's an open house at PBH and you can get paid to tutor kids. And I was like, ooh, let's go, because I need some money and I could probably do that. Now, mind you, I had no intention of working with children when I came to Harvard. Since I had to go, I was like, well, it's all about money. I need to make money. Because I really felt that I needed to take care of my family. I wanted to take care of my mother and my sisters and brothers. So I go to this, like Monique said, I go to open house, I signed up for everything. I was like so excited. And that was the beginning of totally changed my life. This young lady is Latrina, and she was the first student that I enrolled in my program when we would go to the developments to sign the kids up for summer camp. She wasn't technically supposed to be in summer camp because she was 5 and we started at 6, so she was in a legal camp. But she followed me all over, like we were going house to house, signing up people, and she kept following me. And I was like, oh my God, she's so cute. Like, and she's like, I want to go to camp. And I was like, oh, she didn't fill it out. So she was in my camp. And when I met this young lady, I was like, oh, something's tugging at my heart. These were my campers, my 6 and 7-year-olds that I had my first year at Franklin, IO. And when I say that PBH became my family, like Monique said, Bob Kelly, who was, what was his, facilities? He was my dad. He told everybody I was his daughter, and he was literally my dad. We hung out every day. Monique was my mom. She was my director of programs. And then Gail Burton came, and she became my director of programs. So then I had 2 moms. Levita Tandy, who just got put on the PBHA board, was the director of, we called it Inner City Outreach, but Franklin, IO. And she also became president of PBH. And she, like Monique said, freshman year saw me and was like, you're gonna take over my program. I'm like, what? I was 17 years old. So she made me first the funding coordinator, and I had the job of finding funding, so I found ABCD and said, we're gonna have junior counselors and they're gonna get paid by ABCD. And I brought it back to the rest of PBH. And then the next year she made me the curriculum director, and I went to the Children's Museum and found all this curriculum for our students. And what I did with my kids is they were 6 years old. This was the beginning of them going into a summer program. And so I wanted to expose them to everything. I think exposure for students is very important. And they had really never left their neighborhood and where they live. So we were always going on trips and exposing them to all these different things. And that village of Davida was the director of CYP. And they were like best friends. So I hung out with CYP and IO. We were always doing everything together, but they were a year ahead of me. But they mentored me. They literally showed me everything. I started hanging out with them, and I learned how to be a leader from them and from PBH. My first interviews were done at PBH. My first proposals were written at PBH. I raised money there. I learned how to hire. I learned how to discipline people. I took my driving test on the PBHA van. All right, I was told that that was probably was not supposed to do that. I did, yeah. I know that was me. But yeah, and when I pulled up, it was so funny. When I pulled up in the van, the guy was like, "You're taking a test in this?" And I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "Okay." I'm like, "It's good. I can see everything. It's high. It's got a big mirror." But yeah, I took my driving test in the PBHA van. We were always doing stuff. Greg Johnson, senior year, gave me the Echoing Green Fellowship, and he told me to apply. The first person that actually told me to be a teacher was Bob. He was like, you need to be a teacher. And then Greg gave me the Echoing Green Fellowship application, and I wrote a proposal to start a school. And I wrote that proposal to start a school just because of my relationship with the families, and they always said that that was a barrier for them, like daycare. So I was going to start a daycare and a school. And I was one of 2 Harvard students that got the Echoing Green that year. And Echo and Green was another, the CEO of Echo and Green now is a PBHA Harvard student. Cheryl, and she got it the first year it was offered. So I was able to go visit your school with my staff, and people from Kwame School helped us to implement student advocates for our middle school students. I'm now the proud principal of Columbia Academy Charter School in Wilmington. And when I say I love what I do, it's not a job. I so love being with my students, and they're difficult. They are difficult. Everybody can't handle them. But when I say that nothing that happens in your life is for you, it's for somebody else. And everything that I went through helps me to connect with my kids. I literally had a student having an issue, and I had to have a meeting with her and her mother. And she's just angry, and I'm like, and I was an angry kid. I was angry at Harvard. I sat in because I was mad about only having 2 professors for Afro-American studies. And that became a whole thing, and we got skink gates. So I was always, I did have attitude, and I did cause some trouble while I was at Harvard, I did. But it was good trouble. It was good. But this student was just angry, and come to find out, she's angry because her father has just been put into prison. Well, that was my life. So I was able to talk to her. I was like, I know exactly how you feel, because my dad was always in prison. And we immediately connected, and her whole attitude changed. Nobody else could have gotten through to her. She was angry at every teacher, telling the teachers off, leaving class, doing all this stuff. And every time she sees me, she just comes up to me, gives me a hug, and I can get her to do whatever I need her to do. I know, I don't regret anything that has happened in my life, because I know that it helps my kids. They can relate to me because they see me as somebody that has gone through what they've gone through. That's the same as with these kids. I had no problems with my Iowa kids. I know y'all thought I wasn't gonna be able to do it because I was quiet, but I didn't play. And they knew it, and I got that from my grandmother, like, don't make me say something twice. So you can go to the next one. So this is the Echo and Green Global Mentors, and that whole process was about social entrepreneurship. I love helping people develop their ideas so that they can do major things in the world. And so this has been a phenomenal experience. Again, Cheryl is the one that called me, another PBHA person. She's like, we're getting ready to launch this thing. I think you can really help when our new fellows are coming in, and you can give them some advice and walk them through their first year. So that was an amazing opportunity. We also, in Delaware, passed HB 198, which means Black history has to be taught K to 12 in Delaware. So we read Ruby Bridges every year. I don't care what everybody else is doing. They can be banning her book all they want, but my students know who she is, and we start our year with her. And I think this is something that I'm very passionate about, and that's about, I don't believe that where a student lives should determine the quality of education that they get. I did a whole series with my staff on zip code matters, and I'm just so tired of students in cities or wherever they're at getting a completely different academic experience than someone else, because that was my story. When I went to Harvard, there was a thing, people were saying that a lot of us were there because of affirmative action. I mean, probably, yes. But when I say I might not have had a perfect SAT score, I might not have gone to a prep school, but I had a life experience that was different from a lot of the other students, and that they needed. I was able to challenge people in classes for some things that they said in a respectful way, I remember sitting in a history class. Because there was an issue with Afro-American studies, I had to do the 2 concentrations at first, and then we sat in because history wasn't gonna work for me. But I concentrated in Afro-American studies, and we were studying our history, but I was studying from the Afro-American lens and then also studying it from history. It was completely different, and that was a problem for me. So I didn't mind reading the history books. I love history. I didn't care if it was based on the slave owner's opinion. I didn't care about that. The only book on the syllabus written by a Black person though was Frederick Douglass's book. So I'm now reading history from my people from 2 different perspectives, and it exploded in the class one day because another student said, when we had finally got to Frederick Douglass, and that was the last book we read, they didn't understand because in the other books we read, the slaves were happy, they were singing, we were helping them, we were civilizing them. And so I'm like, and so when we get to Frederick Douglass and he's talking about his experience, a student literally said, well, it couldn't have been that bad. It was bad for him because he could read and he was intelligent, and I just lost it. I was like, okay, I gotta get out of here. Like, y'all doing too much. And so that's when I went full Afro-Am. But in most cases, I've always been able to. My grandmother had a saying that if everybody agrees on everything all the time, somebody is not thinking. She said, because we all have different experiences. We've all come from different places. So other people are not gonna always think like you, but you need to listen and honor what someone else is saying and be able to fulfill that. So this is something that I do at my school with my students so that they can understand why some things has happened. Why do we live where we live? Well, every time things happen, and this is from my town. Everybody knows about like Wilmington and Tulsa, but this is from my little town in Marion, Ohio, where all the Blacks were run out because of an accusation of saying something to a woman. So that history we need to know, and we can't allow it to be erased. So that is one of my big passions. My students did a whole, go to the next one. I'm not gonna read this, I was gonna read this, but it literally talks about how Brown v. Board of Education, although it did integrate schools, it also decimated the Black schools. Like, all Black teachers lost their jobs. And she's talking about how even though there were some deficiencies in access or materials, that we had a good educational system because we were learning about our culture and our teachers were like us and were helping us to understand how to navigate life in this country. So these are my kids, so I just wanted to show how we still learn about Ruby. So this is Ruby. They did this a couple of years ago, and the kids dressed up like her and took a poster, and these are all over our school. So they were so excited that I was coming here to see Ruby. They were like, oh my God, we know who that is. So I'm trying to hurry up. And then these are my students, current students, who literally were in Chicago last year and were able to speak to 3,000 people nationally and internationally about their educational experience and about HB 198, about, we had also just opened a school-based health center, and so they also talked about having Black doctors in their health-based center. And so I was so proud of them because they literally got on this stage like they were grown adults, and they crushed it. So I want to leave you guys with this quote. I love this quote. It's an African proverb. And it says, unless the lion learns to write their own story, the hunter will always be the hero. And I believe that it's so important for us not to forget our story. We can't let people take our story away. Our stories are powerful. They are what helps us to unite as a people. And Ruby's story was so powerful. Yesterday was so powerful, and it just made me think about how every story that I've always heard, statistics are great. We were reading this at our meeting earlier, and everything in here, this report about the impact of PBHA, is true, and we all have stories about how amazing this organization is. And I always get emotional. Like I said, I'm surprised I didn't read my speech, but I always get emotional when I think about PBH because I know I would not be who I am today without this organization. I definitely wouldn't have become an educator. I definitely would have not made it through Harvard. Harvard was hard for me. It was hard for me. My mother one time called me and didn't have money to feed my family. And I'm sitting at this school in a dining hall. And I'm like worried, like, oh my God. So this place was hard for me. And the people at PBH, my second family, Bob, Lee one day took me in. I was about to have a breakdown, and she was like, come in here. And I ended up being the receptionist. But all of those people saw something in me and took me under their wing. And at the time, they didn't know what I was going through. I later shared, but they didn't know what I was going through, but they could see it on my face. So everyone knows anything PBHA wants and I can do, I'm going to give, always. Because at the end of the day, this place impacts so many beyond. Of the stuff that you are doing now, you're gonna see the rewards so much later on. So I just thank you, I'm so honored for today, that's it. Again, I just wanna encourage you guys to keep doing what you're doing because you definitely are making a difference. Thank you so much.